History, we are told, is a straight line, a simple, linear progression. From primitive shelters to stone temples, from the bronze axe to the iron sword, from the dark of superstition to the light of scientific reason. It is a story of progress, an arrow shot from a primitive past, flying steadily, predictably, into a complex future. But this is a comforting lie. True archaeology is not the study of a straight line. It is the study of a broken mirror. And when we gaze into the scattered fragments of our past, we find that some pieces do not reflect our world. They reflect a different sky. These are the glitches in the timeline, the impossible sites. For decades, we have been obsessed with how the ancients built their world. How did they lift the megaliths? How did they quarry the stone? We focused on the engineering, but we have ignored the more profound, more unsettling question. We have forgotten to ask, why? Why create art that no human eye could see? Why haul 14-ton stone vessels into a desolate field? Why build a subterranean metropolis 18 stories deep, with doors that only lock from the inside? Why create a pattern on the earth that feels less like a temple and more like a machine? And why? Why would an entire culture dedicate itself to changing the very shape of their children, to look like something not quite human? These sites do not challenge our timeline of technology. They challenge our timeline of psychology. They are not mysteries of muscle and rope. They are mysteries of the mind. Today, we are not exploring the how. We are investigating the why. These are the 5 most bizarre archaeological sites on Earth, and the disturbing questions they leave behind. We begin in a place that was never meant for us. The Nazca Desert, Peru. One of the driest places on Earth. A flat, sun-scorched canvas of rock and sand, stretching for hundreds of square miles. From the ground, it is chaos, a meaningless jumble of disturbed pebbles and shallow trenches. You could walk through it for days and see nothing at all. But from the sky, it is a message. These are the Nazca lines, a sprawling gallery of over 800 geoglyphs etched into the desert floor. Not by carving the rock, but by meticulously removing the reddish-brown, iron oxide-coated pebbles to reveal the lighter, gray earth beneath. The figures are enormous. A hummingbird, its wings outstretched, measures over 300 feet. A spider, precise in every detail, spans 150 feet. A monkey, a condor, perfectly straight. Mathematical lines that shoot across the desert for miles. Triangles and trapezoids, so vast they look like airstrips from some forgotten age. They were created by the Nazca culture, sometime between 500 BCE and 500 CE. And for over 1,000 years, humanity was completely blind to them. They were only rediscovered in the 1920s, when commercial airplanes first began to chart routes over the Peruvian desert. This simple fact is the source of the entire mystery. The central, unavoidable why. The official story, championed by the brilliant mathematician Maria Ricci, who dedicated her life to studying them, is that the lines formed a massive astronomical calendar. The figures align with constellations. The lines point to solstices and equinoxes, a way to track the seasons, to know when to plant, when to harvest. Others propose they were ritual pathways, that the Nazca people would walk these lines in procession, perhaps in a trance state, to connect with their sky gods or water spirits. These are plausible theories, but they feel incomplete. Why create a calendar so vast you could never read it? Why perform a ritual that is invisible to its own participants? The sheer obsession with precision, the continental scale of the art, it feels disproportionate. The question, why, at Nazca, is not just a question of motive. It is a question of audience. Who or what? If this was a message for the gods, it is the most elaborate, precise, and permanent prayer ever uttered. But what if the audience was not a god in the spiritual sense? What if the audience was literal? The trapezoids look like landing strips. The figures look like waypoints. It's impossible to ignore the feeling that this entire desert is a greeting, a map, or a warning, intended for someone or something. Looking down, the Nazca people spent generations moving millions of stones with astronomical precision to create an art gallery that no human would see for 1 to 1,000, 5 to 100 years. The why remains unanswered. It hangs in the dry, silent air of the Peruvian desert. The ancients were sending a message to the sky, but halfway across the world, in the misty jungles of Laos, another ancient culture was not concerned with messages. They were concerned with containers, and what they were built to hold is the source of a chilling and giant mystery. This is the Plain of Jars. Scattered across thousands of square miles of remote highland Laos are over 90 distinct sites, and at each site, the same bizarre objects. Massive, megalithic jars carved from solid stone. Some are small, the size of a bathtub. Others are colossal, standing over 10 feet tall and weighing up to 14 tons. They are made from sandstone, granite, and limestone, materials quarried from miles away. There are thousands of them. For decades, their purpose was a complete enigma. The local legends are revealing. They speak of an ancient race of giants whose king, Kun Chung, fought a long and terrible war. After his victory, he commanded these jars to be built, to brew and store an enormous amount of lau lau, the celebratory rice wine. Science, of course, searches for a more terrestrial answer. And in recent years, a new, more sober theory has emerged. Archaeologists, including Dr. Louise Schuon, have conducted excavations, finding human bone fragments and teeth buried around the jars. The current consensus is that this was a vast, complex mortuary, a two-stage burial process. The dead were first placed inside the jars, perhaps for a period of decomposition or processing, exposed to the elements. Then, once the flesh was gone, the bones were removed and buried in the earth nearby. It was a factory for the dead. But this why only creates more questions. Why this? Why this method? The sheer monumental effort involved. Imagine the labor, quarrying a 14-ton block of solid rock, carving it into a perfect vessel, and then moving it miles across rugged, mountainous terrain, all for a temporary coffin. It feels like using a supercomputer to crack a walnut. The expenditure of energy is baffling. And what of the legends? Myths are not always fantasies. Often, they are the distorted, fragmented memories of a culture. What giant event or giant people inspired the story of Kun Chung? What if the processing was not just decomposition? What if the jars themselves were essential? The stone, the location, the shape. What if it was an alchemical process? An attempt not just to dispose of the dead, but to transform them, to distill a soul or an essence. The why here is one of industrial-scale ritual. It is a level of ceremonial obsession that we simply cannot comprehend. The Plain of Jars is not a graveyard. It is a silent, sprawling, abandoned foundry, built for a purpose we have long forgotten. The people of Laos built massive vessels for the dead who remained above ground. But at the very same time, in ancient Turkey, another culture was driven by a completely different why. They were not processing the dead. They were hiding the living in a fortress of unimaginable scale, built to defend against an unimaginable terror. It begins with a hole in the ground. In 1963, a man in the Nevşehir province of Turkey knocked down a wall in his basement. He found a room. Behind that room, He found another, and another. He had not found a cave system. He had found a city. This is Derinkuyu. It is not the only underground city in Cappadocia, but it is the deepest and most famous. What starts as a simple tunnel descends and descends and descends. It is an 18-story subterranean metropolis, a vertical labyrinth plunging over 280 feet into the volcanic rock. This is not a bunker. This was a home. It was designed to hold 20,000 people. It has apartments, food storage rooms, massive communal halls, churches, schools, and even wineries and oil presses. It has stables for livestock. It has a complex ventilation system of over 50,000 shafts, providing fresh air to even the deepest levels. It has wells that provided clean water, inaccessible from the surface. And it has doors. At key junctions, giant, circular stone doors were carved. They could be rolled into place, sealing off one level from another. And they have a design feature that is the key to this entire mystery. A small hole in the center, a pivot point. They could be rolled shut from the inside, but not from the outside. This was not a prison. This was a panic room for an entire civilization. The official why is defense. The city was likely started by the Phrygians thousands of years ago and expanded over centuries. It reached its peak with the early Christians, who used this vast complex to hide from Roman persecution and later from Arab raiders. It was a place to retreat, to wait out a siege, to protect a people from a hostile world above. And this makes sense until it doesn't. 20,000 people, 18 stories. Think of the psychology required to live this way, to raise children in the dark, to never see the sun for months, perhaps years, at a time. What kind of fear drives a culture to such an extreme? A human army, no matter how brutal, eventually leaves. They cannot lay siege forever. But Derinkuyu is not a temporary shelter. It is a permanent, self-sustaining world. It was built to last. The people of Derinkuyu were not hiding from an army. The sheer scale, the permanence, the paranoia built into the rock, suggests they were hiding from something else entirely. What if the enemy wasn't human? What if the why was not persecution, but cataclysm? A memory of a solar event that scorched the earth? A volcanic winter? A recurring, cyclical disaster? What if the enemy was something that came from the sky? The local name, Derinkuyu, means deep well. It is a fortress built against a terror we can no longer name. The why is not defense. The why is desperation. The people of Derinkuyu used the earth as a shield. But what if other cultures were not trying to hide from the earth's power, but to harness it? What if the why was not about building a refuge, but about building an engine? When we think of megalithic sites, we think of circles, Stonehenge, Avibury, places of ceremony, oriented to the sky. But in Carnac, France, we find something different, something colder, more mathematical. This is not a circle, this is a grid. These are the Carnac stones, the largest single collection of megalithic standing stones in the world. Over 3,000 of them. They are not randomly placed. They are organized into perfect parallel lines, known as alignments, that stretch for over 2.5 miles. Some stones are small, others are giants, over 20 feet tall. They were erected sometime between 4 to 1000, 5 to 100 and 3 to 1000, 3 to 100 BCE, making them older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Giza. The why here is, officially, unknown. The most popular theories mirror those of Stonehenge. It was a massive astronomical observatory, used to predict the solstices and equinoxes. A vast, open-air temple for a sun-worshipping, Neolithic people. But a 2.5-mile calendar? This site doesn't feel like a temple. A temple has a center, a focal point. Carnac has no center. It is all repetition. It feels systematic. It feels industrial. The why at Carnac may not be about observation. It may be about function. The stones are almost all granite, a rock extremely high in quartz. Quartz is piezoelectric. When you put it under mechanical stress, it creates an electric charge. It is also a resonator. These 3,000 stones, driven deep into the ground, are sitting directly on top of one of the most seismically active and magnetically powerful areas of Europe. They are aligned with the flow of the Earth's natural telluric currents. So, what if this isn't a calendar? What if this is a machine? A machine. A 3,000-part grid, designed not to watch the sky, but to interact with the Earth. A massive, passive amplifier. A condenser. A terrestrial battery. Was it designed to gather energy? To stabilize the very ground it sits on? To transmit a signal? We simply do not know. But the why shifts our perspective. Carnac stops being a primitive temple and becomes a piece of lost, silent technology. A circuit board, whose power source was shut off 5,000 years ago. These sites challenge our concept of ancient technology, ancient fear, and ancient messages. But our final site is perhaps the most bizarre of all. It doesn't challenge what the ancients built. It challenges who the ancients were. It forces us to ask a question that shakes the very foundation of our own identity. What does it mean to be human? In the 1920s, the Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello made a discovery that should have rewritten our history books. In the Paracas desert, he uncovered a vast, complex necropolis. And in that graveyard, he found skulls that did not belong to any known human. They are the Paracas skulls. And they are bizarre. They are elongated, stretched backwards, with a cranial volume that, in many cases, is 25% larger than a modern human skull. Now, the official story was established almost immediately, and we must be clear about it. Science tells us this is the result of artificial cranial deformation. This is a known, documented practice, seen in cultures all over the world, from the Huns to the ancient Egyptians. An infant's skull is soft and pliable. By binding it tightly with boards and cloth, you can force it to grow into a different, elongated shape, perhaps as a sign of nobility or tribal identity. Case closed. This is the scientific consensus. But is it? The why of why they did it is one mystery. But the why of what these skulls are is another. Because the Paracas skulls don't just look shaped differently. They look structured differently. First, the cranial volume. Head binding can change the shape of a box, but it cannot increase the volume of what is inside it. Many of these skulls don't just look bigger, they are bigger. Second, the sutures. A normal human skull has 3 main plates. Many of the Paracas skulls reportedly have only 2. Third, the foramen magnum. This is the large opening at the base of your skull, where your spine connects. In a normal human, it's positioned centrally. In many of these skulls, it is positioned further back. And then, there is the DNA. Now, we must be cautious. This is the bleeding edge of this mystery, and it is highly controversial. Most DNA tests on these skulls show, as expected, Native American ancestry. However, a series of preliminary tests, championed by researchers like Brian Forster, claimed to have found anomalies. Mitochondrial DNA, the DNA passed down from the mother, that, quote, had mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. This could be contamination. It could be flawed testing. It could be wishful thinking. Or it could be a paradigm break. This brings us to the most bizarre why of all. Why? Why would an entire culture inflict this painful, dangerous process on their most elite children? The official answer is culture. But what if it wasn't? What if they were not creating a new shape, but imitating one? What if the Paracas culture was trying, desperately, to make their children look like a race of people who were born this way? A ruling class? An elite? A different species, with larger brains, different DNA, and a different origin? What if the bizarre Paracas skulls are not a cultural practice, but the evidence of a lost, non-human subspecies, and the tragic, human attempts to copy them? The why here is not about ritual. It is about identity, and it is the most disturbing question of all. A message to the sky, a vessel for the dead, a fortress against the dark, a machine for the earth, an imitation of the lost. These are not the fragmented monuments of a simpler past. They are the monuments of a different past. The bizarre nature of these sites is not a flaw in the historical record. It is the record. It is the clue. They are proof that the ancient human mind was not just a primitive version of our own. It was a different mind. A mind that saw the world through a different lens. A psychology that perhaps perceived forces, energies, and beings that we, in our modern, linear world, can no longer see. They break the timeline of history, not because the stones are impossible, but because the intentions behind them are. Here at 0 Point Lore, we believe the past is a puzzle, and the only way to solve it is to be willing to ask the questions that challenge everything we think we know. If you believe that history is more than just a straight line, help us explore the fragments. Subscribe to 0 Point Lore. We want to know what you think. Of these 5 bizarre sites, which one do you believe holds the most profound secret? The message? The vessel? The fortress? The engine? Or the skull? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.